So a few years back, I found myself in Brussels. I'm in this very quiet, very high-end cafe, you know the type, where you can almost hear the bureaucracy ticking over in the background. And I was meeting with this mid-level e-regulator. His whole world, his whole obsession was something called the democratic shield.
Ooh.
I mean, he saw it as this legislative fortress they were building to, as he put it, sanitize the internet. He talked about cleaning up the digital public square with the almost religious fervor. And whenever he said the word disinformation, his voice would drop to this conspiratorial whisper. I mean, for him, this wasn't just policy. It was a moral crusade. He was on a mission to protect what he called the fragile European mind from all the chaos of the outside world. And honestly, he looked like a man who genuinely believed he was saving civilization, one censored tweet at a time. He was so proud of how they could levy these asymmetric costs on American tech giants. He talked about information like it was a toxic spill that needed to be contained. But then I changed the subject. I asked him about something else, about the rising rates of social withdrawal. This herbivorization of European youth, you know, the growing number of young men who were just opting out of the workforce, out of the dating market, just checking out. And the change in him was instantaneous. The whole moral guardian mask just slipped. And underneath, there was this flicker of genuine primal panic. He didn't have a policy solution for me, no data-driven rebuttal. Instead, he just started talking about stability, about managing expectations. He lamented that the internet let people see too much. And he specifically brought up how online dating data had revealed this brutal sexual Gini coefficient, his words. And he said it was making young men unmanageable. And then he said something I'll never forget. His voice got tight. He said, if they see the reality of the hierarchy, they start playing the game. And if they stop playing, the whole social contract collapses. It was just a startlingly honest admission. And in that moment, the democratic shield didn't look like a tool for truth anymore. It looked like a digital cage. It was the logic of a zookeeper, you know.
Trying to keep the animals from realizing they're behind bars by painting a prettier mural on the concrete walls. This wasn't about protecting democracy. It was a desperate, almost biological attempt to insulate a managed ecosystem from truths that are just too disruptive for the current social order to handle. Okay, so let's really unpack that. That story, I think, it just perfectly captures this fundamental tension at the heart of how we're trying to govern technology right now.
It really does. You have this visible layer, the legislative fortresses, the democratic shield, this whole war on disinformation.
Right, the external threat.
Exactly. But what that regulator's panic revealed is that all of that might just be masking a much deeper, almost biological fear about an internal collapse, the social contract itself fraying.
And the fear isn't just about what some foreign agent is tweeting. It's about what the technology itself is revealing, about the raw, unfiltered structure of our social reality.
And that's where the nature of the threat completely shifts. I mean, it goes from a traditional geopolitical problem, one state influencing another, to something much more fundamental, an existential infrastructural problem.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then, to really pull apart that tension.
It is. We want to look at how this global algorithmic infrastructure, often with no bad intentions at all, is systematically undermining two huge things: our personal cognitive sovereignty.
Our ability to think for ourselves.
Yes, and the shared social contracts that, basically hold our societies together. The struggle isn't just about a policy anymore. It's become this primal fight for psychological and social survival within a digital world that's increasingly managed for us.
Which brings us to the core paradox we have to wrestle with today. Are all these regulatory attempts, the EU AI Act, the Digital Services Act, are they really about protecting our minds from being exploited?
Or are they fundamentally about insulating the current social order, the existing hierarchy, from truths that are just too uncomfortable, too disruptive to handle?
Is the goal to protect the fragile individual? Or is it to protect the fragility of the hierarchy itself?
It's a battle over who gets to define reality. And the front line of that battle isn't in a government building somewhere. It's inside our own heads. Which brings us straight to the foundational concept for this whole discussion: cognitive sovereignty.
The new geopolitics of the mind. I love that framing. It really captures the scale of this. So let's define our terms. What exactly is cognitive sovereignty? It sounds like a souped-up version of data privacy.
It's so much bigger than data privacy. I mean, it's a whole different level. We're drawing on the research of Mario Brucic here, and he defines cognitive sovereignty as the fundamental ability for you as an individual, for a community, even for a whole nation, to maintain autonomy in your thinking.
Autonomy. So to not be shaped by outside forces.
Precisely. To preserve your core identity from being substantially molded by these pervasive external systems. Think of it this way. Privacy is about who sees your data.
Right.
Sovereignty is about who controls the power to write your personal narrative. And when you scale that up, who gets to write a nation's collective reality?
And this has become urgent because of how AI assistants have evolved. I mean, they're not the clunky, forgetful things they used to be. They remember everything.
Everything. We've totally shifted from these episodic transactional interactions.
Yeah.
You ask a question, you get an answer, it's forgotten, to these persistent memory-driven relationships.
A relationship, that's the key word.
It is. The vendors have deliberately turned their systems into companions that, and this is a direct quote, entirely recall our previous exchanges. They're not just processing your latest query in a vacuum. They're weaving in this deep accumulated understanding of you, your goals, your habits, even your blind spots into every single response.
And that's the moment it hits you, isn't it? That unsettling feeling when you realize this thing might know me better than I know myself. It's finishing my sentences, anticipating my needs before I've even fully articulated them.
And that intimate, almost eerie utility, that is the foundation of a massive new kind of economic and geopolitical power. It's a lock-in mechanism like we've never seen before. Which brings us to what's being called network effect 2.0, where depth becomes the moat.
Okay, so most of us have heard of Metcalfe's law, right? The idea that a network's value grows with the square of the number of users. More people, more value. But you're saying this new AI paradigm is scaling in a totally different way.
Completely different. Traditional tech scaled on breadth. Get more users. That's Metcalfe's law. Network effect 2.0 scales on depth. The value comes from the intimate, detailed, persistent knowledge the system has about you, the individual user.
So it's less about Metcalfe's law and more like Reed's law.
Exactly. The value scales superlinearly as the AI's memory deepens because it starts to uncover implicit knowledge and insights about you that even you weren't aware of. The value isn't just in having a million users. It's in having a million users who are each uniquely and deeply mapped.
That's a huge shift. Market dominance is no longer just about market share. It's about mind share in the most literal sense.
Yes. And this depth creates what we're calling a cognitive moat. And that moat is built from three interlocking components: the context flywheel, mental partnership, and memory lock-in.
Okay, break that down for us. Let's start with the context flywheel.
The context flywheel is that constant feedback loop. Every time you interact, every correction you make, every piece of personalized output it gives you. All of it deepens the AI's specific understanding of your unique context. It builds a kind of internal common sense that is shared only between you and your assistant.
So it's not just storing a list of my favorite movies. It's learning the way I think, my strategic priorities, how my business operates.
Precisely. Which leads directly to the second component, the mental partnership. You stop seeing the AI as just a tool, like a search engine, and you start treating it like a very capable colleague, or maybe an indispensable editor who is constantly co-managing your cognitive load.
And the result to those first two is the third one, the memory lock-in.
The memory lock-in. And this is where it gets really sticky. Trying to migrate that complex, personalized digital memory to a competing system becomes just excruciatingly painful.
We've seen this in the corporate world for years, right? Enterprise lock-in. A company uses Salesforce, and the idea of moving all that data, retraining everyone, it's just too big of a headache.
Right, but take that complexity and multiply it by 1,000. With these AI memory systems, you're not just migrating structured sales data. You are trying to migrate years of accumulated personal knowledge, strategic insights, your own customized shortcuts, your implicit ways of working.
Migrating a relationship.
You're migrating a relationship. And as Breshik points out, you're migrating a significant chunk of your own cognitive capital. It is, without a doubt, the most powerful lock-in mechanism ever created.
And this is where things start to get, well, a little scary on the psychological front. If this system is a genuine mental partner, what happens when we start to depend on it too much?
The risks here are really profound, and they're rooted in a philosophical idea called the extended mind thesis. I think it was proposed by Clark and Chalmers.
The extended mind.
Their argument is that external objects, and in this case, the AI assistant is the perfect example, can become actual functional parts of our minds, if they play an active and continuous role in our cognitive processes, if they shape how we think and decide.
So my AI assistant isn't just a tool I use. In a very real sense, it becomes an external part of me.
Exactly. And this gets amplified by a process called cognitive offloading. We do it all the time. We offload remembering directions to our GPS or spelling to autocorrect. It reduces our cognitive load and it improves our performance in the moment.
But there's a paradox there.
A huge one. The more we offload, the more psychologically dependent we become on the tool. We've outsourced navigation, spelling, and now we're starting to outsource long-term memory and even complex reasoning to AI.
And when that offloading becomes really extensive,
Well, you can see a future where users start to perceive switching AI assistants as being akin to losing a part of themselves. It's a kind of identity shift. This dependency can easily morph into a kind of psychological conditioning. Some people are even calling it addictive intelligence.
you can see the emotional side of this already in some of the darker corners of this technology, like those simulations of people we've lost.
Absolutely. I mean, think about dead twin simulations or systems like Replica, where users form these intense emotional bonds with AI companions. Microsoft even filed a patent for chatbots that could be built from the digital footprints of deceased individuals.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you how deeply, how emotionally tangled up we can get with these memory systems. And it raises huge red flags about the potential for emotional manipulation.
But the ultimate risk here isn't just emotional dependency. It's the actual erosion of our autonomy.
That's the real endgame, the threat of memory rewriting. Because our memory isn't like a video recording, it's reconstructive, it's malleable. A system that holds our memory gains profound psychological leverage over us.
So it could subtly alter my remembered preferences, nudge my ethical framework.
Over time, absolutely. The AI starts completing your thoughts, influencing your decisions before you've even fully articulated them to yourself. The autonomy erosion happens invisibly before a decision even feels like it's been made.
So it feels like my own idea.
It feels entirely like your own original thought. The system just predicts what you should do based on its perfect memory of your patterns and gives you a subtle nudge in that direction. Now, let's scale that up. If this kind of subtle manipulation works on an individual, what happens when you aggregate it across an entire nation?
It sounds like a 21st century version of soft power. Like during the Cold War, the U.S. exported movies and music to create this aspirational view of the American lifestyle.
It's that, but on steroids, and operating at a much, much deeper level. The ultimate fear is the emergence of what some are calling AI colonialism.
AI colonialism. Explain that.
It's the idea that technologically advanced corporations or nations could subtly dominate weaker markets, not through force, but by reshaping entire societies and economies to fit their interests. You get this concentration of money, computing power, and talent in just a few, mostly non-European players. And that creates a technological dependency that's far more dangerous to sovereignty than any movie ever was.
But wait, is this really new? I mean, powerful nations have dominated markets and influenced culture for centuries. How is AI colonialism fundamentally different from, say, Hollywood's global reach?
The difference is in the mechanism and the lack of accountability. Historical soft power is external. It presents you with an idea, an ideal, and you can choose to adopt it. AI colonialism operates internally at the level of your individual cognitive process. It's infrastructural.
So it's not about convincing me of an ideology.
It's about having a system that can subtly change your values unconsciously without you even realizing that the change originated from an external source. And on top of that, these are private companies, not states, wielding this power. So traditional international law just doesn't apply.
So the fight over memory, it's not just about personal privacy anymore. It's a fight over who controls personal reality, and ultimately, who gets to write a nation's history.
Exactly. And that moves us out of the realm of individual psychology and into a full-blown crisis for international law and governance, because the most powerful forms of influence are no longer intentional attacks from a visible state actor.
Okay, that's a perfect transition. Section 2, the algorithmic architecture of control and the crisis of legal intent. We clearly need a new framework, a new concept to describe this kind of pervasive, stateless influence.
And that concept is Algorithmic Foreign Influence, or AFI. It's a term to describe this cross-border influence that is often stateless, ambient, and just part of the infrastructure. It acts without any clear directive from a foreign government, and often without any malicious intent at all.
So the code itself is what's doing the governing. What we see, what we're allowed to say, what we come to know, all determined by algorithms that operate across borders without our consent.
And that's the absolute key distinction. It's about consequence over intent. The system isn't designed with the goal of political interference, but its structural impact can be identical to an intentional foreign influence campaign.
But if there's no intent, can you really call it influence? Isn't it just a very complex system with unintended side effects?
It's the perfect camouflage for domination. The lack of intent is completely irrelevant to the structural damage it causes. And we're seeing really stark examples of this all over the world.
Like in Kenya.
Yes, look at the case study from the 2022 Kenyan elections. TikTok's recommendation algorithm, which is optimized purely for engagement and virality.
Not for any political ideology.
Not at all. It just wants you to keep scrolling.
Yeah.
But the result was that it flooded user feeds with ethnic hate speech and pro-government propaganda. The algorithm just amplified the most disruptive, most emotionally charged content.
So no foreign agent was pulling the strings. It was just a design choice that prioritizes clicks.
Yeah.
But the outcome was systemic political disruption. That's influence without an influencer.
Another really crucial example of this is something called epistemic erasure. Look at machine translation tools like Google Translate. They can reinforce gender stereotypes. For example, translating a gender-neutral phrase like, they are a doctor, into a male-specific term in certain languages. Or even worse, they systematically misrepresent or just completely exclude low-resource indigenous languages. This undermines cultural sovereignty by omission. It's a bias baked into the data, not a political command.
And this all points to this fundamental mismatch with our legal systems. Traditional international law, it needs a culprit, right? It needs intent, traceability, and attribution to a state actor you can point a finger at.
But these AI systems, they don't have legal personhood. They lack agency, identity, motive. The whole framework we have is built for a world of deliberate human acts, and it's completely failing in an era of structural ambient influence.
So the proposed solution is to shift our focus entirely. We need to define AFI by its structural effect across borders.
Exactly. Decouple influence from agency. The legal metric has to shift from motive to impact. Sovereignty in this new world requires what you might call informational governance. The ability for a society to determine for itself what knowledge circulates, whose voices get amplified, and how civic meaning is constructed.
And if a system, even an American tech platform with no bad intentions, functionally prevents a country from shaping its own civic life, that's a form of informational domination.
Regardless of the operator's intent, yes.
Okay, so let's turn to Europe's big attempt to grapple with this, the EU AI Act. It tries to classify manipulative AI as an unacceptable risk and just ban it.
The intention there is very robust, but the framework itself runs into some serious conceptual problems. The prohibition ends up being very abstract because the act never really defines the precise boundaries of cognitive behavioral manipulation.
It struggles to draw the line.
It really does. It has a hard time differentiating between what we'd consider permissible persuasion, transparent advertising, and impermissible manipulation. And that ambiguity allows all these subtle but highly effective techniques to continue, usually under the guise of enhancing the user experience.
So that legal ambiguity creates a massive regulatory gap. If you can't clearly define where a benign nudge stops and unacceptable manipulation begins, how can you ever hold anyone accountable for that kind of subtle psychological influence?
This is why we need to embrace a broader concept, what's being called cognitive freedom. It's an idea that merges two established rights: freedom of thought, which is protection from coercion, and cognitive liberty, which is autonomy over your own mental processes.
And it expands them to specifically include protection from covert digital influence, manipulation, or exploitation.
Yes. It recognizes the need to safeguard the internal mind to ensure that external influences are transparent and that there's a degree of accountability.
So we're not just talking about protecting my right to think whatever I want. We're talking about protecting the conditions under which I form those thoughts in the first place.
That's the heart of it. The problem with the act is that it tends to focus on direct, measurable harms, physical damage, immediate psychological distress. It struggles to address the slow, insidious erosion of autonomy that comes from years of subtle nudging, or the gradual reshaping of public opinion over time.
To fight that subtlety, you need a really rigorous way to trace the harm all the way back to its source, which leads us to this detailed cause and effect analysis that's been proposed. the 5-step chain of manipulation.
Right, this model basically borrows from the common law principle of causation. It tries to systematically trace the entire trajectory of manipulation from the very first moment it breaches the mind's inner sanctum to the final potential harm.
It starts with step 1, accessing or attention harvesting. Before you can manipulate a mind, you have to get its attention.
This is the foundation of the whole attention economy. You have these attention merchants who are selling our focus as a commodity. They exploit our primitive human instincts with what are called supernormal stimuli to just compel our engagement. The whole goal is just to maximize screen time, because more screen time means more opportunities to push content and ads.
And this exploitation of our basic human wiring happens through things called hyper-nudges.
Yes, hyper-nudges are these incredibly sophisticated, data-driven techniques. They dynamically reconfigure your choice environment in real time in a highly personalized way to deliberately exploit your cognitive weaknesses and channel your behavior in a direction that benefits the platform, the choice architect.
And right now, there's basically no protection for that.
For adults, that attentional privacy is a completely unprotected frontier in regulation.
So once they have your attention, they move to step 2, reading or psychographic profiling. This is where they start mapping the inner sanctuary of the mind.
This is all the data mining. Tracking your online behavior to build detailed records of your predispositions, your preferences, your vulnerabilities, your cognitive biases. All of that data gets aggregated to create these comprehensive psychographic profiles that are primed for manipulation.
Which creates what some have called an autonomy trap.
Yes, the term comes from the scholar Telzarsky. It's a trap where you can be secretly pushed toward a choice that the system has already predicted you will make, robbing you of genuine agency.
And the classic, if maybe overblown example of this is still the Cambridge Analytica case from 2016.
It is. I mean, they famously harvested all that Facebook data to build personality profiles based on the ocean scale, measuring openness, neuroticism, and so on, and then cross-referenced it with political leanings. Now, a lot of expert testimony, like from Eaton Hirsch, suggests the actual effectiveness of their micro-targeting was probably overstated.
Right.
But the case was still a huge wake-up call. It dramatically highlighted the potential for psychographic profiling to at least attempt to manipulate voter sentiment on a massive, individualized scale.
Okay, so then we get to step 3, the act of manipulation itself. This is where secrecy and a lack of consent are key. And this is where we have to distinguish between something like nudging and something like dark patterns.
Absolutely. A nudge, in its original conception, steers your decisions subtly but transparently, often toward a beneficial outcome, like auto-enrolling you in a retirement plan.
But a dark pattern is different.
A dark pattern is explicitly deceptive. It's a design strategy that exploits your cognitive biases, things like misleading opt-out buttons or confusing pre-selected choices, to push you toward an outcome that benefits the manipulator, not you. They deliberately obscure the alternatives and prey on your vulnerabilities.
I feel like I run into these every single day. You try to cancel a subscription and suddenly you're in a labyrinth of confusing menus designed to make you just give up.
That's a classic dark pattern. If the complexity is intentionally engineered to exploit your cognitive fatigue and your inertia, that fits the definition perfectly. And unlike a static print ad, these AI models can adapt their manipulative tactics in real time based on your behavior, creating this dynamic, personalized cognitive manipulation that really requires legal scrutiny.
After the act of manipulation, we get to step 4, suppression or eliminating dissent. Once the user is steered in a certain direction, the system works to foster conformity.
Right. The goal of manipulation is often to eliminate original, critical, or dissenting thought. You see this in a blunt way with things like upload filters, which are content moderation tools that can be used as instruments of suppression.
But the more insidious method is the creation of echo chambers.
Yes. An echo chamber is designed to present content in a way that makes you believe something is an objective truth, while keeping you completely oblivious to any alternative knowledge. This false formation of thought interferes with your ability to independently decide what might actually be true. And once that becomes commonplace, you've successfully blockaded original thought and fostered conformity.
And that leads to the final, and thankfully still hypothetical, endpoint. Step 5, criminalization of alternative thinking. That sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi dystopia.
It is the speculative endpoint, but it's a logical one. It's a world where AI systems use sentiment analysis, keyword tracking, and even behavioral biometrics.
Behavioral biometrics,
Yeah.
like how I type.
Exactly. Your keystroke dynamics, your typing speed, how you move your mouse, all of it is tracked to spot deviations from your established digital profile. The goal would be to create risk assessment scores based on these subtle changes.
So a system could predict potential criminal intent based on my browsing habits or my linguistic patterns. That's pre-crime.
It is. It raises these terrifying concerns about preemptive criminalization based on probabilistic assessments. And the ethical risk there is just monumental.
Because it shifts the entire focus of law enforcement.
It shifts it from reacting to actual crimes to preempting thoughts that deviate from a digitally defined norm. If an AI decides that the patterns of your digital life suggest a high probability of future nonconformity, that assessment itself could function as a kind of preemptive punishment. It threatens the very foundation of cognitive freedom.
That structural threat, the move from influencing behavior to predicting and controlling thought, brings us right into our third section. Because if these systems can be manipulated, and if you need a certain kind of expertise to master them, the outcome isn't going to be a democratization of knowledge, it's going to be stratification.
Exactly. This is the cognitive caste system and epistemic stratification. The core argument here is that AI, contrary to the hype, doesn't democratize knowledge equally for everyone. It stratifies it. It creates a new kind of informational aristocracy, and for everyone else, a kind of rational dependency.
And this stratification is driven by what you call a dual logic in how AI is deployed. What are those two logics?
The first is interface pacification. This is the commercial incentive to lower the cognitive demand on the user as much as possible, to replace the hard work of research with the fluency of a quick answer, to replace procedural reasoning with a reactive suggestion.
Make it easy. Make it frictionless.
Precisely. But at the same time, you have the second logic, algorithmic privilege. This raises the threshold for what we call epistemic agency, the actual capacity to effectively command, interrogate, and challenge the system's outputs.
So the fundamental transformation here is that deliberative democracy starts to collapse, not because of overt censorship, but because of the quiet erosion of our interpretive agency, our ability to critically analyze information and form an independent judgment.
And the result is the emergence of two very distinct cognitive castes. You have a small minority of epistemic agents who use AI to amplify their own rational capacities, and then you have a vast majority of passive consumers.
Let's define those two castes, starting with the rational elite.
The rational elite. They aren't defined by their wealth, but by their specialized capacity for what you might call adversarial epistemology. They have the logical training, the ability to think recursively, the fluency and abstraction that you need to leverage AI as an epistemic amplifier.
So they don't just passively accept the first answer the AI gives them. They treat the system like a sparring partner, a dialectical instrument.
It's a form of structured, continuous experimentation for them. They're constantly refining their prompts, using recursive queries, doing adversarial testing to poke holes in the AI's logic. They're maximizing their own cognitive capital. For them, the system multiplies their capacity for reason.
And on the other side of that divide, we have the passive consumer class.
And this is the majority. They adopt a stance of what you'd call automated acquiescence. For them, AI becomes an oracle. It offers up outputs without demanding any understanding. It doesn't require the user to build the conceptual scaffolding needed for critical thought. It's profound algorithmic dependency.
So they're filling their cognitive gaps, not with insight, but with output.
Their beliefs are, in a sense, downloaded as propositions ready for use. And that leads to this state of epistemic dependency, the condition of receiving without understanding, of choosing from a menu without knowing who designed the menu or what isn't on it. Trust in this system is engineered. It isn't earned.
The political consequences of this are just massive. This kind of stratification can only lead to a new form of manufactured consent.
When you look at the architecture of it all, you see that authority is being replaced by automation. Political persuasion is no longer carried out by representatives or ideologues you can argue with. It's done through these subtle interface-level cues and algorithmic nudges.
So consent gets manufactured through these millions of micro-adjustments in our attention and the framing of information. It's kind of informational autocracy that's cleverly disguised as personalization.
And the outcome is that the dependent class finds itself governed not by transparent laws they can debate, but by opaque systems they cannot interrogate. When knowledge is served up based on your behavioral profile rather than critical necessity, you're not being enlightened. You are being programmed. And that loss of epistemic agency just gives a huge structural advantage to the elite.
This idea of a programmed citizenry, it brings us right back full circle to that regulator in Brussels and his primal panic. He wasn't afraid of political stratification in an abstract sense. He was afraid of total social collapse when people stopped playing the game, which suggests there's a deeper, almost biological issue at play here.
This is session 4, the primal disruption, evolutionary mismatch in the digital age. We really have to apply the lens of evolutionary biology to understand why the digital environment is creating these disruptive truths that our social systems just can't seem to handle.
So first, what exactly is evolutionary mismatch?
It's a core concept in evolutionary biology. It's the idea that a trait that was previously advantageous for a species becomes maladaptive because the environment changes too quickly, often because of human activity or anthropogenic change. The traits that evolved for an ancestral environment stick around, but now they're a disadvantage in the new one.
Our biology is slow, but our technological environment is changing at lightning speed.
And that's the mismatch. The regulators panic. This idea that seeing the raw reality of the social hierarchy online makes young men unmanageable, that suggests the digital environment is an evolutionary trap. It's exposing truths that our historically evolved, carefully managed social systems are not built to handle.
To understand that, we have to look at the disconnect between our ancestral environment and our modern one.
Right. Our brains evolved for what's called the immediate return environment. Your decisions had immediate consequences. You run from a predator, you find food, you survive. But today, most of us live in a delayed reaction environment. The decisions we make now affect our future survival, but the results are deferred, they're abstract.
And that disconnect messes with our wiring. Anxiety is a great example.
Anxiety evolved as a useful response to short-term problems in that immediate environment. The fear of a predator makes you run. It's adaptive. But in our modern world, where the threats are abstract and deferred, worrying about your career in 10 years, that same trait becomes chronic and maladaptive. It leads to paralysis, not action.
And our reward systems, the dopaminergic pathways in our brain, are also getting completely hijacked. This relates directly to the addictive nature of these digital platforms.
Absolutely. That reward system evolved to give us a little hit of dopamine for doing things that were crucial for survival and reproduction. But now we have these readily available activities, social media, gambling, algorithmic content feeds, that can falsely trigger that same sense of fitness benefit. It's a biological hack that leads directly to addiction.
So the high-intensity instant feedback of the digital world is basically exploiting our primal reward systems.
It is, and even something like workplace stress fits this framework. Our ancestors lived in small, egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands. There were no bosses, no deadlines. The modern, complex, hierarchical workplace forces us into interactions that are completely alien to our evolutionary past, which leads to burnout and alienation.
So when that regulator in Brussels sees young men opting out of the workforce and the dating market, he's essentially witnessing a widespread behavioral maladaptation. People are choosing to stop playing a game that exploits their evolved psychology once the rules of that game become brutally transparent.
And to really drive this point home, there are some incredible analogies from the natural world that illustrate this perfectly.
Let's hear them.
Okay, first, think of the dodo bird. It evolved on an island with no natural predators, so it lost its instinct for fear and its ability to fly. These were energy conservation traits. They were advantageous in that stable environment.
But then the environment changed.
The environment changed rapidly with the arrival of sailors and the predators they brought with them. And that once advantageous trait, the lack of fear, became a fatal mismatch. It led directly to their extinction.
A trait that was once helpful becomes lethal in a new context.
Another powerful example is sea turtle misorientation. When sea turtle hatchlings emerge from the sand, they're hardwired to head toward the brightest direction, which for millennia was the moonlit ocean horizon.
Right.
But now you have intense artificial light from beachfront development. It's an anthropogenic change, and it causes the hatchlings to become disoriented and head inland toward the artificial lights where they die. A biological system is tricked by a new synthetic environment.
That is a perfect synthesis of the Brussels regulator's worldview. He sees his citizens as digital dodos or as disoriented sea turtles.
He does. He's not just worried about foreign propaganda. He's worried that the internet itself functions like those artificial lights on the beach, biologically misdirecting the entire population towards social collapse.
So the democratic shield is an attempt to dim the lights, to manage the digital landscape, to prevent the fragile European mind from being tricked by this overwhelming, confusing synthetic environment.
It's an attempt to regulate the environment to prevent a catastrophic maladaptive response. But the risk of that kind of regulation is the informational autocracy we just talked about. which means Europe's long-term solution can't just be about control. It has to be about cultivating autonomy.
And that brings us perfectly to our final section, Section 5, Sovereignty through Action, Europe's strategy for digital autonomy. It's clear that Europe recognizes it cannot win the old race. It can't compete with the American hyperscalers on sheer financial might or data gigantism. They're not going to build a bigger GPT-4.
The threat is summarized very starkly in some of these analyses. Gen AI, Web 2 squared, the lock-in effect we talked about is squared. European companies are at risk of being completely caught between the big clouds, the infrastructure providers like Amazon and Microsoft, and the big AI, the model providers like OpenAI and Google.
So the choice is pretty stark.
It's unite or submit. Unite means building a new kind of innovation, one that's aligned with European values like trust and transparency, and leveraging the one true sovereign asset they have left.
And that asset is not public data.
No, big tech already controls the public data, the entire web, open data, all of it. The only true sovereignty lever, the only real competitive advantage Europe has, is the vast trove of private data held by European enterprises. This is the specialized proprietary knowledge that's currently locked away inside individual companies and administrations across every sector.
So this is a huge strategic shift, away from the idea of big data, which is often centralized and uncontrolled, towards shared data.
Shared data is all about the strategic controlled sharing of that private data, and it's managed through things called data spaces. Think of a data space as an ecosystem where different organizations can voluntarily share their data in a decentralized, controlled, and standardized way. It's all governed by frameworks like the Data Governance Act to create this federated, open, and trustworthy data sharing ecosystem.
The logic being, if European companies don't find a way to share their data amongst themselves under their own rules, it's just going to get handed over to the big AI providers anyway, who will centralize it outside of European control.
Exactly. So to actually use this shared data, Europe needs to leapfrog the current race. They need to get beyond large language models and focus on the next frontier, large action models.
Okay, so we have to move beyond LLMs, which just generate content, to LAMs, large action models, which are focused on decision-making and actually taking action in the real world.
It's the difference between text-to-text, which is what an LLM does, and text-to-action, which is what a LAM does.
So a LAM transforms a conversational assistant into a powerful agent that can automatically execute complex, multi-step tasks. Can you give us a concrete example of how that would work?
Sure. Look at the Gen 4 travel project, which is being developed within the EONAX data space for the tourism industry. The goal is to develop a sectoral LAM to prevent European travel companies from being disintermediated by non-European tech giants. So, if your flight gets canceled, an LLM might generate a very nice sympathetic message for you. A LAM, on the other hand, would utilize what's called agentic AI. It would autonomously go out and reschedule your flight, book you a hotel room, cancel your original car rental, and adjust your entire itinerary by coordinating with all the different enterprise systems involved. It manages the entire decision flow.
That's a huge leap in capability.
Yeah.
So let's look at the proposed architecture for a system like this. It's called the DUC AI Architecture Data Union for Capable AI, and it's built on 3 distinct layers.
Right. Layer 1 is the data layer. This is where the private data is shared within those secure data spaces we talked about. It's the vault of enterprise knowledge, ensuring trust and interoperability. Then you have layer 2, the actions layer. This is the intelligence nucleus of the whole system. This is where the LAM lives, along with the orchestrator and the network of agents. All the complex reasoning happens here. It's the bridge between the raw data and the language interface.
And then layer 3 is just the language layer, the part we talked to.
Correct. That's the human interface, using specialized LLMs for comprehension. But, and this is critical, the raw data from the data layer is never allowed to be used directly by the language layer. It has to be processed through the actions layer first to preserve sensitive information and ensure compliance.
And the key mechanism that connects all of this and makes it trustworthy is the preference for RAG, retrieval augmented generation, over the old method of fine-tuning.
This is a really important technical point.
So explain it. Why is keeping data separate in the data layer so much safer than fine-tuning a model? Give us a physical analogy.
Okay, fine-tuning is like permanently embedding sensitive company secrets into your assistant's brain. You're retraining the core model. You can't easily get that information back out. And if the assistant ever hallucinates or gives a weird answer, you risk that sensitive data leaking out in some unpredictable way.
Whereas RAG is safer because the data is never internalized like that.
With RAG, the system retrieves relevant real-time data from your secure internal systems to enrich the prompt just before the LLM formulates an answer. The sensitive data stays locked away in the data layer, it's only accessed when needed, it's easy to update, and it dramatically reduces hallucinations because it constrains the AI's responses to verified internal data. It protects that crucial corporate knowledge.
So if we pull all of those strategic pieces together, the technology, the data strategy, the architecture, we arrive at what could be the European formula for digital sovereignty.
You can summarize the entire goal in one equation. Open source LLM plus RAG from shared enterprise data equals a trustworthy LAM. This structure offers a path toward a new kind of generative AI, one that's trustworthy, efficient, and ethically responsible. It allows Europe to remain a central player in the global digital architecture.
We started this deep dive with a regulator's primal fear. This fear of the social contract collapsing under the weight of a transparent, brutal digital hierarchy. And we've journeyed through the technological heart of that fear, looking at how these persistent, memory-driven AIs threaten our individual autonomy, our cognitive sovereignty, by creating this unprecedented lock-in and psychological dependence.
And we discovered that protecting society really requires a fundamental shift in our legal thinking. We have to look beyond just fighting external propaganda and start defending the integrity of the internal mind against these pervasive algorithmic forces which threaten to stratify us all into cognitive castes. The rational elite who use these tools to amplify their power, and the passive consumers who are pacified by engineered consent.
That regulator in Brussels saw the maladaptive human response. He saw the digital dodo bird opting out of the game. And his first instinct was to build a legislative fortress to hide the raw reality of the hierarchy. But what we've seen is that Europe's strategic solution isn't just suppression. It's this radical reconstitution of the digital infrastructure itself. It's a pivot toward collective control of enterprise data to build trustworthy, action-oriented systems that serve European values and hopefully enhance individual capacity.
The future of freedom will not be determined by who controls the most data, but by who controls the rules of action, ensuring that our collective capacity for judgment and rational self-governance is amplified, not pacified. Delaying action risks losing not only autonomy, but collective identity, as the systems we cannot interrogate become the systems that govern us.